Senator, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be. I agree you're an intriguing person. Sounded a little like a Dos Equis commercial, but but
probably be a better interview if we had some Dos Equis.
That's for interviews after 5.
All right.
Let me just say we're going to go to student questions in about 20 minutes or so, give or take. And I want to make clear that we're going to be calling only on students because of the limited time that we have.
We're going to judge that by age, appearance. How are we going to figure that out?
No, we're going to look at their records and see.
All right.
Senator, I'm going to finish on the subject that you started with, but I want to cover a lot of ground, including the reason that you're here today. You're in Chicago. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing in Chicago, and let's talk about that issue for a few minutes.
I visited a school called Josephinum. It's a Catholic school. It's been around over 150 years. And I visited here to promote something called school choice, charter schools, competition, letting kids choose where they go. I've supported this from the federal side in the sense that Title I funds that go to poor schools, I've said let's give it to the poor kids and let the kids choose which school they go to. I think competition would make our schools better. I think we need more innovation. One of the charter schools that they had today was a virtual charter school where you can learn at your own pace. I'm fascinated by the problem solving and explanation I've seen in Khan Academy. If anybody's not seen that, you should go online. Just the amazing explanations and the innovations that we could have if we didn't have such a rigid top-down kind of educational structure. I think we need more freedom of choice by parents, more empowerment of teachers to make more choices, principals, superintendents, everybody, but less rigidity coming out of Washington.
We've got a public school system here in Chicago that's deeply, deeply in debt. It's a big problem. Would going to a voucher system not rob the public schools of money that they need to, that they don't have right now in order to pay teachers and provide the kinds of resources that these schools need?
Yeah, some would argue that it doesn't necessarily, that by taking off some of the money their costs are fixed, that it wouldn't. But there would be some competition. I mean, there would be, some of the poorer schools would eventually probably go out of business and the better schools would get bigger. But it'd be the same way of saying, you know, we have hospitals and we're going to have no competition between the hospitals because healthcare is so important, and then we just keep all of them regardless of how their quality is. So I think competition breeds excellence, and will it mean that some will survive and some won't? Gradually, maybe over time, people will flock and gravitate to the better schools.
And what happens to the kids who can't get into the better schools and see their schools close?
Well, see, right now what we're finding is that 99% of the kids don't get in a good school, and the 1% who have parents that'll force their way through magnet schools and charter schools, like the parents we met today, some of them are driving their kids an hour to get to Josephinum. I think there's one, Southland College Prep on the south side of town, same kind of thing. People will drive forever. So there are only a small percentage are getting there now. Most are left, even without more charter schools, in failing schools. So what I would say, when you have more charter schools, more scholarships, more people will get that great education. But I defy anyone to meet these young kids like at Josephinum that are doing so well. 100% of the kids at that school will go to college, get into college and go to college. Not just graduate, get into college. So I defy anyone to say, why wouldn't we want, if we have 150 kids at Josephinum type school, why wouldn't we want another school like that? Why wouldn't we want 300 kids or 3,000 kids or 300,000 kids to get that opportunity?
So getting into college is one measure. How do you measure a successful school? How do you know that the kids are getting a good education?
It's complicated, but I would say that nobody in Washington has any clue as to whether your education's any good. They're too far from the problem. They're not experts in education. I think Washington should have nothing to do with this. And so what I would say is that, and this goes both ways.
Who should set standards?
Well, you know, I grew up in a time when there was no Department of Education. We took the California Achievement Test, I took the ACT, I took the SAT, I took the MCAT. All of these were compared nationally. And it's a little easier to do national than international, but there are other ways of doing it. It doesn't necessarily require a federal government to be in charge of that. But I think that when you look at the system we have, it's sort of, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting it and expecting a different result. We've got problems. We're not competing well internationally. Your school's here in Chicago. You had a better year last year. You're up to about 63% graduation rate. Josephinum's close to 100%. So I think we need to look, we need to allow more innovation. Sometimes people think, oh, this is just something against the public school teachers. I want to empower teachers. I want to empower principals. I want to give them more power to make decisions at a local basis. Same with money. You'll go to a district that gets $100 million for their school district, and they'll be having a donation drive to get money for pencils. And you're like, really? You have $100 million, you don't have enough money for pencils? Why? Because the federal government tells you how to spend all of it. If you don't spend it exactly the way they tell you, they take it away from you. But it may be one year you have a child with quadriplegia, which is extraordinarily expensive to help that child, but then the next year, maybe you go 5 years without a child with quadriplegia and you have less expenses for disabilities and you put more money in computers. But you have to empower someone to make that decision instead of saying on high, 1% of your kids won't, no child left behind. 1% of the kids don't have to take it. Well, what if 2% of your kids are incapable of taking the test? It's so rigid. You need more innovation. You get more innovation with local control, I think.
But you consider it a national issue, a national problem, the performance of our schools.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem that our country is not doing as well as the rest of the world.
And it doesn't make sense to set standards of some sort that are uniform enough so that kids from state to state have to meet those standards?
I think it's important.
Isn't that what the SATs and the...
Well, I think it's important to diagnose the problem correctly first. Groucho Marx said the art of politics is looking everywhere for problems, finding them, misdiagnosing them, and then applying the wrong solution.
He really said that, Groucho?
That's what I heard. Okay. I don't know. Anyway, the thing is about the education is you have to figure out what is the solution. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great book called Outliers, and in it he maintains that the only thing absolutely correlated with improving educational scores is a longer school day and school year. He said nothing else correlates. He says class size doesn't really correlate. He says money doesn't really correlate. Although,
presumably if you have longer days and a longer year, it costs more money, right?
But the thing is he said longer years, longer days correlates. And so that does mean something we ought to try differently. But you aren't getting the innovation that you need. For example, I think there are teachers who are like professional football players. There's 1,000 professional football players. They're extraordinary. There's probably 10,000 extraordinary teachers. Let's find those teachers, put them on the internet, and have them teaching most of our kids. I'm not saying get rid of the teacher in the classroom, but if there's someone like the guy in Khan Academy is like an ex-business guy. He's not even a teacher, but he has an extraordinary ability to explain complex problems. I was on there the other day and watching him do little drawings and explain the Doppler effect. It was better than anything I'd ever had in school. And I was like, gosh, this guy needs to be teaching the Doppler effect for everybody. And that's what should happen, is extraordinary teachers should be filmed and broadcast in every class, colleges too. I mean, there's so much information and ability to transmit it that we need to allow for innovation and not just be stuck in the old model. But the old model is because people don't want to allow anybody to get involved with the system. And I'll give you an example. John Stossel did this thing on education a couple years ago, and they had 400 teachers who were inappropriate, touched kids inappropriately or did things with kids that made them, or they couldn't teach anymore. They couldn't fire them. They had them in a building in New York City, and they just were there day after day being paid, but nobody could fire them because the contract was 14 pages. The union you couldn't even fire a pedophile. So, I mean, that's a problem. I would pay some teachers more, but I would pay some less, and I would fire some. But you need to allow that kind of structure to occur where the one that's on there with their feet on the desk reading the newspaper and doesn't do squat for the kids needs to be out the door.
But you're a senator thinking of running for president of the United States, and you don't think the federal government should have any role in any of this?
I think
not
that
in terms of providing resources or...
Education historically was a state and local subject, and I think that what we've seen is, since we spend about $100 billion in the Department of Education each year, and that's been going on since 1980. I'm not sure we're better off than we were before. See, the one thing
you propose a budget that would eliminate most of that, right?
Well, what I would do is I would have it spent at the state and local level. I wouldn't take it up there at all. I'd leave it at home. So you'd spend the money. You might still spend it in your state government, but education, even now, 95% of your education dollars are state and local. That $100 billion gets swirled around in a big bureaucracy up there. They send rules down that don't help education. They hinder innovation. I would cut them out of the loop. I don't think you'd notice if the whole department were gone tomorrow.
We
might have a disagreement on that.
No, I'm sure that we do, and I'm not eager to run the experiment either. I don't want to get. We could talk about this for a long time, and I want to cover a number of topics here before we get to the student questions. Jeb Bush recently got criticized for suggesting that illegal immigrants were committing an act of love by trying to come to the country and support their families. What was your reaction to that?
You know, my first thought was that I think he's well-intentioned in what he's trying to say. But, and if you were to ask me what I would have said that people who seek the American dream are not bad people. But that doesn't mean we can invite the whole world. If you love somebody in America, you can come. When they've done surveys on this around the world, 700 million people would come. 700 million people love our country and would come. And that's great because it means we have a great country. We can't have everybody. So there does have to be control. So I am for allowing a lot of immigration. I'm for expanding the work visas. But you can't just say anyone who loves America or wants the American dream.
What do we do about the people who are here, the 11 million who are here?
I'd expand the work visa program to include them. And so I am for expanding that. I think that if you do that, I think you could actually pass a bill. Now, I would do it by securing the border first, and then I would also do it by Congress voting each year on whether the border is more secure, and I would do it gradually over about a 5 or 6 year period, because they've all got to have background checks, they've all got to be, go through the ordinary process of coming to our country. They would just be internally immigrated. They're already here, but we'd have to have them come as immigrants through the normal process. But I would do it with work visas. But here's the problem. This is why I ended up voting against the bill in the Senate, because the bill in the
comprehensive immigration.
The bill in the Senate actually constricted work visas. Right now, to come here to pick crops, it's an unlimited number. The Senate bill limited it to 100,000. Most people estimate that 400,000 people come here to pick crops. So if 400,000 people come to pick crops and you're only let 100 in officially, you're just opening the door for 300,000 to come in illegally. You can't have numbers that are less than what the demand is. For construction workers, the bill set the number at 15,000. We've got 6 million people here undocumented doing construction work. So the numbers, you can't have restrictive. And this is a problem in Washington. That bill was written by the unions and the Chamber of Commerce without any consultation to me or most other members. It was written by them and a few other senators to begin with, and the unions made a deal. They said, we'll support it, because you remember in 2007, the unions weren't all in on this. The unions supported it only if we would restrict work visas. That's the opposite of what you need to do. You need to expand work visas so we can find a place for these people to come out of the shadows.
What about legalization path to citizenship? Could you support that?
Right now, there aren't the votes to allow that.
I'm just asking about your vote.
As far as, I'm not for a new pathway. I'm also, though, for changing the law that says you don't have to go home for 10 years. Right now, it says that if you're here undocumented, you're one of the 11 million, for you to get in line, you'd have to go home for 10 years. I'm for getting rid of the rule or the bar that says you have to be gone.
So you would allow these people to pay a fine and get at the back of the line and work their way to citizenship.
Right. But the difference is, and this is where the Senate bill ran into other problems, they created new visa pathways for all of these people with all kinds of various new rules. What I would say is, if you're here in the country and you're one of the 11 million, there is a line currently for those people who are in Mexico City who want to come. If you'll get in that same line, I'd let you be in both places. Right now, that's another stupid thing we have. The visa system and the whole immigration system was messed up by government. You can't be here on a work visa and also be waiting to come in normally. You can't be in both lines. All you have to do is change one line of a bill and say, you know what, if you're here on a work visa, you can also get in the same line of guy.
So you would grant them a legalized status in the form of a work visa and allow them to await citizenship. Climate change, is that a problem?
It depends. I mean, you're talking too cold or too warm?
Well, we just came through a pretty bad winter here, so.
So we'll just say too cold as well. Climate cooling. I'm absolutely opposed to climate cooling.
Do you have? Do you feel that? Well, everybody in Chicago agrees with you on that. Do you have a? Do you believe that climate change exists, and do you think that it's a man-made problem?
I think that scientific debate should not be dumbed down to politics, and I think this debate has become so dumbed down beyond belief. The Earth is 4.54, 4.6 billion years old. Anybody who's ever studied any geology knows that over periods of time, long periods of time, that the climate changes, okay? I'm not sure anybody exactly knows why, but we have 20, 30, 100,000 year sort of cycles that go on with the climate. It has been much warmer than it is today. We have, real data about 100 years. So somebody tell me what 100 years data is in an Earth that's 4.6 billion years old. My guess is that the conclusions that you make from that are not conclusive. All that being said, I'm against pollution and think we should minimize pollution. Whether or not the models are correct or not, most of the models have been changed within the last 5 years. They all predicted, poor Statue of Liberty was going to drown within 100 years, and the polar bears and all this stuff. And that alarmist kind of stuff really, I think, detracts from the case of that we shouldn't pollute and that we should minimize pollution.
They're spending $10 billion building insulation for the New York subway system after the storm, Sandy, because the system got overwhelmed. And
but there's fewer storms in the last couple of years than there've been.
So basically, what I'm saying is you're a skeptic. Put you down as a skeptic on climate change.
What I would say is that someone is an ignoramus who would say that, we had 3 hurricanes this year. This proves that somehow the climate is warming. The Earth's 4.5 billion years old, and you're going to say we had 4 hurricanes, and so that proves a theory? No, I'm not saying the theory is right or wrong. What I would say is that there is something that all of us should be in favor of, and that is we should minimize pollution, and we should, you remember.
And how do you do that? Would you restrict? The president's considering restrictions on emissions from power.
The president's really fond of saying we need a balanced solution. Did you coin that for him? We do need a balanced solution.
I said that's a great idea, sir.
Yeah. We do need a balanced solution. Okay. We are not going to, or we won't be able to live the way we do with lights and air conditioning and heat if we don't have any emissions, okay? If we don't have cars, we could live in the Stone Age. All of these things pollute. Cars pollute, so do coal factories, so do anything we burn, so do campfires. We have to balance the desire for as clean an atmosphere as we can get and as clean as water we can get with jobs. And in the last 40 years, we have gone completely crazy and out of balance with owners' regulations. And I'll give you just one quick example. The Clean Water Act says you can't discharge pollutants into the navigable waters of the country. I completely agree. I don't think there's one person in here who says, let's just dump some benzene in the Chicago River. Nobody believes that. But what has happened over time is we now classify dirt as a pollutant and your backyard as a navigable stream. We put a man in jail, and I'm actually trying to see if we could get him a pardon. He's been in jail for nearly 10 years. He's 70 years old when he went to jail. He's 78 years old now because he put dirt on his own land to raise the elevation. They said it was a wetlands. There was no water on this land. This isn't the Everglades. There are 300 different plants they can find, and if they find them on your land, they call it a wetlands. They can drill the soil, and if they find percentage of water in your soil, they can call it a wetlands, and they can throw your butt in jail for 10 years. They convicted him under the RICO statute. This is a government out of control, and we've gone beyond protecting the environment to destroying people's private property rights.
Do you consider the doubling of fuel efficiency standards a balanced answer to the problem?
Doubling them from where?
From where they were when this administration took over, the agreement that was made with the industry.
Yeah, I think that there is a point at which you go too far. I'm not sure I know the exact number, but it's sort of like with the dust rule in mines or something. We get to something where we want to minimize something that's harmful, but then if we have people making the rules who don't have a balanced solution, who only see one side, and this is the problem, that our government is so large that if I hire you and you're a regulator, are you really thinking about regulating? That's your job. Or are you thinking about balancing that with civil liberties and with private property rights and with jobs? I think what happens is we have too many people say, my job's to protect the environment, so I'm for every regulation that comes down the pike, but I don't realize that I just put 10,000 people out of work in Kentucky because there are no more coal-fired plants. And so it does have to be a balance. Also, if you care about the Earth's atmosphere, that coal's going to go to China and be burned with no atmospheric controls in China. So we do need more balance. I think the pendulum has gone way too far with very little consideration for jobs, and too much consideration for maybe theories that aren't always provable.
You gave an interesting speech at the Freedom Forum, is that what, in New Hampshire, about the Republican Party and needing to expand its reach. And you talked specifically about drug laws and the disproportionate application of drug laws. Can you say a few words about that?
80% of the public is white, probably 10-12% is black. They say white kids and black or brown kids use drugs at about the same rate overall, but 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown. So I think the war on drugs, not purposefully, but inadvertently, has had a racial outcome. And the president, this is one thing I'm happy to compliment the president on. In the last couple of days, and really over the last year, he started commuting some sentences and letting people out. For a long time, we punished crack cocaine different than powder cocaine. So you could have the same amount, but crack cocaine tended to be used more in the African American community. You had 10 and 20-year sentences, and the rich white kid that went to college was getting out in 6 months or not going to jail at all. So yeah, there is a problem, and it's something that I've actually spoken with Eric Holder on. I'm willing to work with the administration on second chance for people, that kids should not have their future taken away by. I think it's a mistake to use drugs, but I think it's not something you should have to give up your future.
But talk to me about the other piece of what you were saying. What message has the Republican Party been sending to minority communities that you think has turned off minority voters?
I think it's a long-standing thing, and I ask myself that question every day: how do we change it? Because I think to be a viable national party, we have to change the African American vote, the Hispanic vote, the Asian American vote, you name it. We got to change. We have a lot of work to be done. Some say, oh, well, this happened in 1964. Those people are 1968 with the Southern Strategy or something. They need to look at the voting rolls. This happened in 1932. Okay, in 1928, 2/3 of the black vote was Republican. In 1932, 2/3 of the black vote was Democrat, and it never came back. Gradually got a little bit worse, but even by the election of 1964, it's close to 90% of Democrats voting, or of African Americans voting Democrat. I think part of the problem was during the Great Depression, and this is when the big switch was happening, people didn't think Republicans were concerned with those people who were hurting. Some of that problem still exists today. People who are poor, long-term unemployment, people having trouble putting food on the table, they think somehow Republicans aren't as concerned about them as Democrats are. What I want people to get to is that it isn't a difference in concern, it's a difference in policy. So for example, I have a policy called economic freedom zones to help people living in poverty and long-term unemployment. It would leave over $1 billion in Chicago. Tax money from poor neighborhoods. It would never go to Washington. It would stay in those neighborhoods and would help create jobs. Democrats would do the same thing, but they would take the money from Chicago to Washington, go through one of those bureaucracies, and then send you some back, but they would choose who they give it to. The problem with choosing who you give it to is that if I say, David, you'd be a great business owner, here's $100,000, 9 times out of 10 I pick the wrong person, because a lot of businesses fail. But if you've already got a Pizza Hut or a convenience store or a manufacturing plant in a poor part of Chicago and you have 10 employees, if I leave more tax money in your hands, I think you're a more capable person because you've been voted on by your community. It's more likely that you create a job than if you send the money to Washington and I bring it back.
Let me ask you a question related to this. There's been a lot of attention paid to, all over the country, rules to constrict voting rights, asking for ID from voters,
right,
birth certificates to register, shorter hours and so on.
Right.
Do you think that has sent a negative message to minority communities?
You know, I think it's a mistake to have emphasized so much. In fact, I've done the opposite. I testified in Kentucky for restoration of voting rights for people convicted of nonviolent felonies. In our state, there's 180,000 people. I don't know the racial competition, but because the war on drugs has had a disproportionate effect, I'm guessing that there's a higher percentage of African Americans. But I've actually been testifying in my state in favor of restoring voting rights. As far as the long hours of it, I grew up in Texas, which was a solid Republican state, and we always had early voting. I don't think early voting is biased one way or the other, so I think eliminating it is a mistake for the Republicans who want to make their whole thing eliminating early voting. I think that's a mistake. Now, whether or not a driver's license, I mean, here's the point conservatives make, and it's a fairly valid point. If you're in government, I could never visit you or Eric Holder or anybody else without a driver's license. Is that not a minimal standard, particularly when we say we'll give you one for free? Most of the voter ID laws say if you go down there, they'll get you a driver's license for free if you don't drive. I don't know. I think that, for example, I don't think dead people should vote. That's one thing I will not compromise on. Dead people shouldn't vote. Dead people still do vote in some elections, and there still is some fraud. And so we should stop that, and one way of doing it is
although the incidence of fraud is relatively
It probably is, and I
small.
think Republicans may have overemphasized this. I don't know.
I don't mean to cut you off because I just want to be respectful of your time and their time. On the issue that you spoke about, do you believe there's a need for intelligence? Do you believe that there are real threats and there's a need for intelligence? And what are the limits of that?
Yes, I am for an NSA, I'm for a CIA, I'm for a DIA, I'm for an FBI. I just think all police, all intelligence have to be restrained by law. And that's what we're famous for. That's what we say we are. We're a country of law. And even the most despicable crime or despicable person, we protect. It's a unique American thing. But we do it because we sometimes get the wrong people. The Richard Jewell thing, I hope resonates with the audience. It resonates with me that the TV got the wrong person. The right to a trial by jury is so fundamental and so profound that it really does disappoint me that the president signed a law saying he would detain people without a trial. I think it disappoints some of his supporters. In fact, I think it disappoints him that he signed it. I think he wishes he would have not signed that bill.
Well, I'll not speak for him, but I don't think he signs bills he doesn't want to sign. But the thing is that the thing I'm having trouble with is the and I think you raise valid points, but you suggest that everyone in this room basically is having their phone records examined, or
not unless they're a Republican. No, not everybody. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But do you have evidence of that?
Everybody's phone record is being collected.
Right, but not everybody's phone records. An infinitesimal.
That to me is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Collecting your phone records is a violation.
But you concede that nobody's looking at them
unless
they are.
Not nobody. They're not looking at everyone's phone records and not listening to everybody's. But there are Americans who are having their phone calls. The records are being looked at, and some are being listened to. Some of it's sort of this backdoor way that they target someone over there to try to get to them over here. But that is, to me, it really is not a question of, and it's not a question of whether the president's a good person or the people he's in charge. But where I really fundamentally disagree with the president is he thinks due process is hiring some more attorneys to work in the NSA and give him some advice. Due process is in a court with a lawyer on both sides arguing it with a judge and with a jury. You can't get due process by just hiring some attorneys to try to have some privacy safeguards. Collecting 180 million, 200 million phone records is a great breach of our privacy. And I think when you sign up with a phone company, you sign a contract and it's a privacy agreement. Like, they don't share my phone calls with you. You can't just go look at my phone calls. Why should they be allowed to share them with the government? When I sign that contract, I'm retaining a privacy interest, and this is what we'll argue before the Supreme Court. We're in the federal court in Washington. I hope to go before the Supreme Court, and the argument will be, I didn't give up my records to you, the phone company. I gave you the right to hold them, but I retained a privacy interest in them through my contract.
If you were a suspect in a crime, then you
absolutely
you
get a judge's warrant.
Right,
and get it.
Right.
Put your name. But see, that's the
but
Fourth
now
Amendment.
but now that's the rule that's in place now, is that they have to get a warrant if there's a suspicion to look at these records that they're collecting.
Right. I would say that you cannot collect all of these records. You cannot accumulate all of this data without a warrant. So it's not the warrant to look at the data. To me, it's a warrant to collect the data.
So your concern is that the data, even if it exists at the phone company and the government can, with a court order, ask for a specific...
There have already been instances of individual employees abusing this and looking at the information. So it's not that there hasn't been any abuses of the program, but it's the potential for abuse. I mean, think about in our times. I mean, I had this conversation with Eric Holder in his office. I said, look, this is where J. Edgar Hoover's office used to be. Everybody remembers what J. Edgar Hoover did to people during the civil rights, movement. We spied on hundreds of thousands of people that were for civil rights and people who were against the Vietnam War. That's within my lifetime, just barely within my lifetime. But the thing is that wouldn't you worry that there might be someone come in place that would abuse that power and abuse those records?
This is a place where I think actually the word balance matters, because I worry deeply about the issues you're raising, and I also worry, and part of it is having been there and having been privy to some of the things that they have to deal with every day. I also worry about the safety of Americans. So
I think you can have both. I think you can have the Bill of Rights and still have safety. The thing is I'm not against looking at these records. If we think Mr. Smith is a terrorist, write his name down on a warrant and get his records. If he called 100 people, boom, send out give 100 more warrants. If he called 1,000 people, but it does mean someone has to look.
Now, if the government doesn't collect, I don't want to belabor, the government doesn't collect the data, and the data stays with the phone company, isn't that the system that we're going to have?
Right now, they say the phone companies, and I haven't gotten an exact answer on this, they say the phone companies keep your records for about 18 months for their purposes. Then I've also heard that it's actually a regulation that they keep them. I think they actually keep them, and it's not necessarily a mandate that they keep them. But I think that the process of having police power separated from the judiciary on warrants, and that a warrant needs to have a person's name on it, and that really I just don't think... They currently say that your email after 6 months has no protection at all. That's how they got Petraeus having an affair. They looked at his email after 6 months, but they didn't even need a warrant to look at his email. We've gone too far. We've gone way too far in allowing a breach of privacy.
Last question, and then student questions. Abortion and choice. There are people in this room probably who would say that the government telling a woman that she can't have that procedure is as big an overreach of government as any, and you're concerned about the overreach of government, but you have a different view on this, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that.
I think the debate is about when life begins. And we may not all have the same answer on it, but as a physician, I would examine 1-pound babies that were alive after birth, and everybody thought they deserved protection. They'd been born. But I guess the question people have to struggle with, if you say, well, I'm pro-choice and abortion's fine, is it okay for an 8-pound baby that's 1 week before delivery? I mean, that's a tough question for people. And our current law says that if you say, I get anxious and I think I might kill myself if I have this baby, you can do an abortion in a day before you're due. That's what the current law says. There are no restrictions. Can
you point to instances of that?
Yeah, so there's two extremes. So I would say there's two extremes. Where we are now is an extreme where there is no real regulation of abortion during the entire gestation. Okay, and then there are people on the other side who say, well, I don't want any abortion during any of the thing without exceptions. Then there are people who say, no, I want abortion without exceptions.
So where do you land?
Well, I think right now where the country is and where the law is, we have abortion with no exceptions for life. It's kind of where we are. My personal and religious belief is that life begins at the very beginning. Where's the law going to be? I think the law could find some in between saying the day before birth you can have abortion and people for religious reasons saying, no, you can't have it from the very beginning. Maybe there is an in-between. Some of the in-between solutions that have come forward are like saying that when the baby is able to react to pain should be a cutoff, or viability. See, a lot of people think the abortion law is viability. It's not. You've probably got viability at about 24 weeks. So that's about 6 months, maybe a little bit before that, maybe even 22 weeks. So a little bit less than 6 months, I'm sorry. You have viability, but you can still have abortion all the way to the very end.
Yeah, although that is not where the debate is on the.
Well, I know, but see, this is sort of,
And that's
the
a very
problem.
rare. That's a very. Is that not a very rare?
Yeah,
case?
it is. But see, the debate for the people on the other side have reversed it and wanted to make it about the first day or two of gestation and about all the different exceptions. So instead of saying the debate is, gosh, it's all life and no abortion, or all abortion and no life, that's where we are right now. We're 9 months of gestation or 40 weeks of gestation with no real exceptions for life right now. And if you say the health of the mother in any fashion that's not really defined can be affected, you can have an abortion at any time. So really the question is, whether or not I think the public's actually somewhere in the middle between those two.
And where are you? That's what I'm trying to get at.
I think that's where that's where the law would be. My religious and personal belief is that life begins at the very beginning.
But would you sign or promote a law that would?
No, I think I think where the country is, and I think that persuasion is part of this, and I think where the country is somewhere in the middle, and that we're not changing any of the laws until the country's persuaded otherwise.
Questions from students? And
we're checking IDs.
Yes, or email. Just hand them.
Thank you, Senator, for coming today. Given today's Supreme Court decision regarding affirmative action, would you be in support of a revised version of an affirmative action based on socioeconomic status and not on race?
I think that there was a time when we had done such terrible things in our country that there really needed to be special protections, even by the law. I think we've come a long way, and I think really that the time in which justice can be colorblind is now, as far as admissions and things like that. Should we still have diversity programs? Yeah, I'm all for them. If you have a law firm or an engineering firm, I was talking recently with somebody about the Rooney Rule of people, was it college football or professional football, trying to interview people of diverse backgrounds to try to get a more diverse outcome on things. I think all of those things are still good, but I think with regard to university admissions and things like that, I think really we're at a point in time where you should be selected on your character or on your quality of your scores.
But you look at the statistics and it seems as if there's a lot of predetermination in terms of class. And I think what the question is right. Should we eliminate class as a consideration, but try and promote race and try and promote?
Well, we do promote socioeconomic equality in the sense that we have lots and lots and lots of loans as far as people getting in. I think really that if you want to fix and you say that poverty is causing lower scores and less admittance, let's fix the problem where it starts, and that's in the very beginning. And that gets back to school choice and other innovation and saying that what we've been doing is not working.
More questions? Just hand someone a mic there.
Senator Paul, thank you for coming out to speak to us today. Justice John Paul Stevens, former Justice John Paul Stevens, an alumnus of this university, recently wrote that the Citizens United decision was a major step in the wrong direction. And I'm inclined to agree with him. How can an average citizen like myself be heard in the political discourse against the backdrop of unlimited corporate spending? Thank you.
I wouldn't be quite so negative on what the average citizen can do. I would agree with you, though, that I think money corrupts the process. I do, however, agree with Citizens United in the sense that I think speech, whether you pay for it or not, is speech. And the thing is that, let's say I own the Chicago Tribune. I've got a much bigger voice than millions of people, and yet no one is proposing that we restrict how much the Chicago Tribune, what articles they write, and where their bias is. So I think paid speech really has to be protected. What I would do, though, and I think, and really all these things have been found to be unconstitutional because of the First Amendment. I think there is campaign finance reform, and this is campaign finance reform that I support that would be held constitutional. What I would do is I would take all government contracts and I would put a clause in them that says, if you want to do work with the government, if you're going to get this $10 billion contract, if you're a defense contractor, or if you're a big union and you're going to get a big contract, you sign the contract, but part of the clause of the contract says your contract's only valid if you don't participate in the donation to candidates. You can decide exactly what that means, whether it's a restriction or not. But that's where, to me, the real unseemliness is corporations and unions, frankly, that get money from government. Let's say you get $10 million. Your first million's to buy a good lobbyist to go lobby for more. It's sort of insulting to have taxpayer money go to an entity that turns around and then lobbies for more with that money. And I think that's where the biggest corrupting of the system comes from, and conflict of interest is. I think that would withstand constitutional muster, because if you want to do work for the government, there is no guaranteed right to that work. You can have restrictions on work, and I'd place it in the contract, and I think that would pass constitutional muster, and that's what I favor.
Do you think that these 501c4s that are social welfare education groups like the Koch brothers organization or STI or any, on both sides, do you think that they should have to fully disclose where their money's coming from?
The interesting thing is the first cases that came out about this was the NAACP versus Alabama, because during the era of civil rights, if you gave to one of these organizations like the NAACP or like anything to try to reverse Jim Crow laws, you were targeted for violence. And so you can see how, while it sounds good, yeah, we should disclose everything, you can also see how that violence could be directed against people because of their beliefs and their donations. But for the most part, I am for disclosure. That being said, we have disclosure on all the campaign entities. 501c4s are restricted from campaigning, so they're not allowed to campaign.
They are. Do you believe that they're not involved in campaigning?
They are involved in, indirectly. They don't advocate directly for candidates, and if they are, then they have to, they either lose
There's
their
been a lot of
status or
money in
whatever.
these states where there are Senate races this year. Do you think that's
Right.
just to illuminate the public?
For the most part, I think speech is good, and I think people are smart enough to figure out speech and to know where it comes from, even without the disclosure. I mean, I think people are. But the only concern about disclosure is the discrimination against people who might donate to particular causes.
Next question. Yeah.
Oh, great.
There
Thank
gotta
you,
be-
Senator.
There have to be some women in this room who want to ask questions. But
My
anyway,
apologies.
That's okay.
Thank you so much, Senator Paul, for coming. I didn't mean that in any bad jest, but thank you so much, Senator Paul, for coming out today. Going back to your discussion of education, you discussed releasing more federal control in favor of state and local innovation. So, as Senator of Kentucky, where do you feel your state actually leads the way, and what policy areas leads the way for the country, and where does Kentucky lag behind?
I'm not sure.
He wants to know where your state is a leader, and I guess a positive way, and where it lags behind.
I think on education reform, actually, we've been ahead of the federal government on many things, and so I think that I also, and this is this I think is important, is that I try not to see things, just in partisan terms. So when my governor, who's a Democrat, asked for relief from No Child Left Behind, I signed a letter with him to the president and said that we should get relief from No Child Left Behind so we can have some local innovation. So No Child Left Behind was done by Republicans. It was a great increase in Department of Education and more control, more expense at the federal level, but it turned out teachers hated it, local schools hated it, and it was too much control. So it's an example of how I think we need to dial it back on that. But I think that's an area where we lead and have been innovative in education.
You know that Kentucky's gotten a lot of attention because Governor Beshear has been very aggressive about the health care law. And you've signed up in your state over 300,000 people who needed coverage. Was that a bad thing on balance?
Well, I wouldn't
within the
describe it
state?
that way, but I think it's important to understand who he signed up. 85% of the 300,000 are on Medicaid, so they signed up for free health care. Free health care is great if you're receiving it, not so good if you're paying for it. And it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but many of our small hospitals are in danger of bankruptcy. My local hospital 20 miles from me just laid off 50 people because the thing is Medicaid pays a lot less than all the other payers. So if I'm a hospital and 40% of my patients are Medicaid and it's a 50% increase in Medicaid for Kentucky, the chance is that if I go to 50% or 60% Medicaid, my hospital may not survive. The other thing is the remaining people that have been signed up are for subsidized health insurance. So we got 85% signed up for free, and the other 15% signing up for subsidized, mostly subsidized. Here's the question that's going to occur in the next 6 months. If you have insurance that's 80% subsidized, and that's the only way you can get it, do you think you're going to be able to pay a $6,000 deductible? Most of them have high deductibles. The hospitals are already figuring this out. The hospitals which supported the healthcare plan are now going, oh my goodness, they're all going to have completely subsidized insurance. They're going to be showing up, and not a one of them is going to be able to pay a $6,000 deductible. We're going to be stuck with all this bad debt. And then I think you see, premiums
Well, when they
rise.
show up now and they don't have insurance, don't the hospitals get stuck with their bills anyway?
They do, but there's maybe some deterrence a little bit to showing up, overly showing up, showing up when you don't need to come. And with guaranteed access, there'll be no deterrence, and in fact, maybe an inducement, to come. There are a lot of unknowns with this. I think it's a noble goal to want everybody to have insurance and to have access. But really, the interesting thing is nobody really figured out that increased access really goes counterbalance to increased cost. That cost actually goes up with increased access. Plus, the president mandated what kind of insurance you have. So my 21-year-old son's got pediatric dental coverage. Doesn't help him any. He's got pregnancy coverage with no wife. He's got, all this in vitro stuff. He's got all this great coverage, but he can't use any of it, And so we signed him up. I did myself personally through the exchange, and they sent him a Medicaid card. So my fear is that a lot of people are going to be signed up on Medicaid that really, they never ask us any financial questions. They didn't ask him whether he was dependent. They just said, here's your Medicaid card.
Another question. Yeah, here.
Thank you. Senator, you've been very vocal about different foreign policy issues. Today you actually had a great op-ed about maybe a turn towards realism. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about, under your vision of how American grand strategy should operate, what areas are of vital interest, how maybe we should focus the composition of forces or diplomatic efforts.
I think with regard to foreign policy that I think there are two extremes. One extreme would be that we're nowhere any of the time, and that's what some might refer to as isolationism. The other extreme may not have a name, but it's we're everywhere all the time. All right, and those are the two extremes. I would say for the last 30 or 40 years, we've been much closer to the everywhere all the time. I have supported the president in coming home from Iraq. I've supported the president in coming home from Afghanistan. I supported going into Afghanistan, but I didn't support going into Iraq. If that gives you an idea of when our national security interests are concerned. I think the problem in Washington is people pipe up and say, well, our national security is threatened. To me, that's the end of the debate, not the beginning of the debate. You really have to have a debate. So we did have the debate over Syria. Was it in our national interest? Did atrocities happen? Yes. Was Assad's government responsible? In all likelihood, yes. But it was also complicated by the fact that you had large populations of Christians on Assad's side and large populations of radical Islamists on the rebel side. And my conclusion was it wasn't in our national interest, even with the atrocity, and that we may well make the atrocity worse. That more refugees would flee if we bombed, that Israel was more likely to get involved if we destabilized Assad, or that it was more likely that radical al-Qaeda elements would take over if we destabilized Assad. So in that case, I said it wasn't in our national interest, but it involves a debate. And I commended the president for letting us have the debate, because in the end, the country did speak. The country said that we weren't interested in going into Syria. But once again, there are extremes, and I think we need to bring it back more towards the middle. Weinberger had a doctrine that he developed during Reagan, some call it the Reagan doctrine, that it needs to be something that there's a consensus on. Not just me saying there's a national interest here, but that really I convinced the vast majority of the public. And that's the thing. If President Obama wants to bomb Syria, he needs to get out there and convince the public. But it was the opposite. 75% of the public was the opposite way and didn't think Syria was in our national interest. So it is a debate and a discussion. It's not easy to define exactly where it is, other than that you have to have a full-throated debate over it. And I didn't think Syria, nor did I think Iraq was in our national interest.
Two things, and then I got to let you go because I'm getting... The first is there ever an atrocity so great that it warrants our intervention, even if it doesn't pass your national security interest? Would the Holocaust, for example, be
Well, you know,
example
the Holocaust was not only atrocity, but combined with invasion of neighboring countries, you know, and spreading throughout Europe. So I think that's a different situation. Are there atrocities or calamities where we should get involved? When Haiti had that massive earthquake, is it okay for the military to distribute water and blankets and things like that? Yeah, I think there are ways we can help. Are there ways we can help when there's an atrocity going on in Africa, short of us being there? Yeah, I think we can help to corral other countries. For example, I think for the most part in the center of Africa, though, we're better off if there are 6 or 7 surrounding countries that we can help to organize that can. Problem is sometimes the surrounding countries aren't much more stable than the country in question. But I don't think you can prejudge it without looking at the situation. But I think that it's important that, you know, realism in foreign policy looks at the situation as they are, looks at the world as it is, and tries not to be Pollyanna about saying we are going to make the world safe for democracy. Turned out that when we got democracy in Egypt, we didn't like it so much. The Muslim Brotherhood won, and then people now that say, oh, we'd rather have the generals. Well, the generals don't allow voting for a third of their population. That doesn't.
Should we have supported Mubarak? Should we have tried to?
We did for 30 years, and he was a crook also. So, I mean, you know, he stole vast amounts, billions. He and his family stole billions of dollars of ours. Mobutu did the same thing. Mugabe did the same thing. You name it, throughout Africa. So here's what I would say. Instead of giving money to governments, why don't we try to facilitate agreements with governments? So let's say agreements with entities. So let's say, for example, we can help by building a port in Alexandria, Egypt. By all means, let's facilitate private investors, Egyptian investors, and try to get a port built there by bringing money in, but they have to guarantee that the property maintains and that you have, you know, that you have your contract to the property and that you can make a profit by doing it. I think there are ways we can facilitate help in countries, but government to government aid is basically the history of corruption. Almost invariably the money is stolen.
So would you
75%?
Would you cut foreign aid? Would you've proposed cuts in foreign aid? Would you eliminate foreign aid?
I would vastly reduce it, and I would start with people who aren't very nice to us, people who burn our flag, people who chant in the streets and yell.
What if the people we're supporting are fighting the people who are burning our flag in the streets?
Right. I've said all along that everybody should ultimately be independent, but I think that countries that have been sympathetic to us, like Israel, would be the ones that I would preserve the longest with regard to foreign aid. But even Netanyahu said when he came over here and spoke to a joint Congress that ultimately Israel also should be independent. And that's true. I still stick
independent
with
meaning less foreign aid from the U.S.
Yeah. And in some ways, some argue even in Israel that it weakens their defense industry because they're forced to buy defense items from us if we give them money, that the development of their defense industry would be better if they were forced to buy less stuff from us.
Well, I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to get into deep trouble if I don't let you go to wherever you're going next. But we appreciate it. We hope you'll come back. I'm sure you're going to be an interesting player in the years to come.